If I could ask the remaining participants to come in. So this is a disaster risk reduction mainstreaming session, just to make sure you didn't want to be at the interoperability session, which is downstairs. So first of all, I would like to welcome everyone. My name is Laura Schmidt. I'm from DG ECHO, the DG for Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection Operations. I am not Nasira Bulawat, so she is our head of Unit 4 Disaster Risk Reduction. She is unfortunately unable to join us today due to an emergency elsewhere. So instead, I will try and convey our main messages. I work on the disaster risk reduction team in our unit, and we also work very closely with the Commission's Joint Research Centre. And right afterwards, you will hear from Ian Clark, who those of you who were here yesterday have already heard from about the DIMKC. And he will explain some wider work they're doing around risk assessments, lost data, and other issues for us and other services, of course. Okay, so why disaster risk reduction mainstreaming? Well, the European Commission is very much committed to preventing, preparing for, and responding to disasters. And at DG ECHO, we do have a very large response unit. We have the Emergency Response Coordination Center, but we also cover disaster preparedness and, of course, importantly for today, disaster risk reduction. And we have been working on mainstreaming for very many years. In fact, the whole civil protection unit and work at the European Commission started in the Environment Department. So it very much started in cooperation with colleagues working on risks such as floods, industrial accidents, forest fires, and other issues. Nowadays, we also work with colleagues in climate action, regional development, but also employment, development, of course, our humanitarian aid colleagues in our own department, cultural heritage, and many others. We also have developed a very strong policy on Sendai. So you heard yesterday from Virginia. Hello. All the detail already about the Sendai framework, so I don't need to go over that again. But as you heard, the Commission was very much involved and the supporter of this framework. And we have also been working with EU member states who have all, of course, all signed up to the Sendai framework on implementing it. And we've also developed a Sendai action plan for the Commission as a whole, with the aim of making all EU policies disaster risk informed. So we work currently with around 15 services from different areas such as health policy, development policy, home affairs, of course, research, regional cooperation, agriculture, and many others. And the latest newcomer to our Sendai mainstreaming and Sendai implementation work has been the financial services colleagues who are now working on a sustainable finance action plan that integrates climate and disaster considerations into making long-term investment decisions. We also very much focused on getting funding, of course, for disaster risk reduction programs, not just inside the EU, but also in the EU neighborhood, through regional programs and also bilateral cooperation, and developing countries, where also DG ECHO has a small program called DIP ECHO that specifically focuses on countries that we know are disaster prone and where we develop disaster risk reduction programs so that the next time typhoon, hurricane, or earthquake hits, the needs for humanitarian aid will be lower, or maybe sometimes non-existent if the country has become so well prepared. You've also heard yesterday from our director, if you were already here, that on the civil protection side, we now have a proposal out and a communication on RescEU, on strengthening EU civil protection across the disaster risk management cycle, so including on prevention, in the communication, which basically includes all the actions we can already do now without waiting for the result of the negotiations on the new legislation. We want to focus more already on using the available EU funds, particularly the regional funds, which are, of course, one of the biggest parts of the EU budget. We also want to work more on making loss data available, and that I will leave to Ian to give you some details about that, but I think already it was very clear from yesterday that these economic aspects are always very important for advocacy, and you need reliable numbers, and you need to know what kind of risks or what kind of impacts the risks really have in order to be able to do good risk management planning. And finally, through the communication, we've also committed to work more on the evidence base as a whole, particularly through the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center, but also in the future through more training and exercise and integrating the whole training research work to disperse and disseminate the knowledge better. Through the current investment period, so the current multi-annual financial framework, for those of you familiar with the EU jargon, we have started to work very closely with colleagues working on the regional funds, particularly the Regional Development Fund and the Rural Development Fund. And those cover risk prevention, risk management, and for the Rural Development Fund, in particular, forest fires, prevention and restoration. And there we are talking billions of money that is being invested. The colleagues from those departments have recently carried out a screening which showed that the risks that countries identify in their national risk assessments are very well covered in the investment plans that develop under those funds. But some small areas for improvement remain. So certain risks, such as forest fires, are not always as well covered as we think they could be. And also the drawdown rate is currently still quite low. So the average is something around 50%, but it can be as low as 10 for certain countries and investment strands. So there's still work to be done, and at the end of this, at the end of 2020, at the end of the financing period, we'll be able to evaluate the impact as a whole. But we do think that progress has been made. There was also a condition for countries investing in risk management to have a risk assessment in place before. And we think that should be strengthened next time around. So not just to have a risk assessment, but also to present already the risk management plan they have developed in that basis. And that we're hoping will go through the negotiations, which are now starting. And of course, we also need the science, and that's why we're here today. So again, we work with the colleagues in DG RTD, and Birgit from the unit dealing with natural disasters, climate action related research projects was here today and already gave you a lot of examples. Also tomorrow, there is of course the day on extreme weather and climate events. And both those areas are areas that we are very interested in. We are able to access all of those projects through the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center, as well as our own projects that we finance for member states, which are much smaller and that are not typically research focused, but that can also develop certain tools, softwares, or strategies for regions and cities, typically working with the local civil protection. So all of these different type projects are available through the DRMKC, as is our lost data work as it stands at the moment, and of course also the community of users activities. You can find out about them there. And it's something that we think also makes it easier for our stakeholders, so the civil protection services, who like ourselves are often very much focused on the day-to-day business of the disaster response, also have a chance there to very easily access all of this wealth of knowledge without having to run around and spending long hours looking for the relevant information. And of course, we're hoping to improve that on an ongoing basis. So just to come to today's agenda then, it was not so easy to choose the topics because, as I was trying to say, disaster risk mainstreaming for us is really very wide, and we work with a lot of colleagues. Climate change would have been an obvious example, but again, you will hear about that tomorrow if you're in that session. And in fact, it's probably one of the most successful examples. So we've had very many sessions already on how disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation can reinforce each other and how the services or stakeholders involved can work together. So for today, we have chosen to focus on risk communication, which is an ongoing topic, which has been also a priority of the member state holding the presidency several times in the past, and only last year was the priority of the Estonian presidency, very much focusing, indeed not so much on the technical part, which is being discussed downstairs today, but more on social awareness, education, awareness raising. So that is the first session this morning, and I'm sure will be very interesting. The second session later this afternoon, I will come back and discuss with some excellent panelists about the economic impacts of disasters. So again, we want to hear about how we can get those, the figures, how we can get the funding, and how we can use that to argue for better risk management planning. And finally, we're closing with a session on cultural heritage. That is because this year is also the European Year of Cultural Heritage, and you see there we were even allowed to use the logo. So this session is officially sanctioned by our colleagues at the Department for Education and Culture, which makes us very happy. And again, I think we have very good panelists that will be able to explain to you how disasters can impact cultural heritage, how you can safeguard cultural heritage, and what that has to do with research. And some of you are maybe actually working on some of those research projects as well, and you'll be able, of course, as for all the sessions, to pose questions after the panelists have spoken. So for now, I want to hand over to Ian to give you some more detail about the JRC's work in this area, and I wish you a very good and interesting day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Good morning, everybody. Today, I'd like to present you a few examples of how the work that is being done on science and knowledge at the JRC is mainstreaming disaster risk management across different activities, and present a few examples. Just to start with an example. We often show at the beginning of presentations, of course, increase the number of disasters and so on over the recent years. Well, this is an example of work that's been done combining population data, settlement data coming from satellites, and then hazard exposure data coming from a variety of different sources of which we've collected over the years, for example, on floods, forest fires, typhoons, earthquakes, tsunamis, and can show you, therefore, how the whole situation has changed over the last 40 years using data, population data is coming from national census. So we're looking from the situation from 1975 until 2015. And if you're interested in more information on this, again, you can find it at the same website we showed yesterday, or just Google GHSL, Global Human Settlement Layer. And there was also an atlas produced last year showing all this detail of this exposure data. Just coming to the whole question of data, in fact, we are very much a data organization at the Joint Research Centre, and how to actually deal with this overload is a key challenge, I think, for mainstream. And we see, for example, in the Copernicus emergency management service, which is producing vast sums of data, terabytes every day, which can be used in for different purposes, but at the moment is perhaps not being as used as it should be. The Joint Research Centre has established an approach now to knowledge management to try and actually see how we can actually manage the information, share it, and better communicate the results. And there are different approaches being taken. For example, we've set up what are known as competence centres to bring together professionals in different areas with technical skills to share across different perspectives. For example, we have a modeling competence centre, so bringing together all the modelers that work at the Joint Research Centre and also the outside organisations which we cooperate. We're also working to establish observatories. This is partly a mandate from the Commission, for example, on artificial intelligence, and we're establishing a joint observatory with DG RTD to help establish how to better use evidence in policy making. Again, if you're interested in more information on this, this week is also what's known as the Commission's Knowledge Week, so there are a series of events on how knowledge is better managed from the 6th to the 8th of June, also looking at disaster risk management. So we see very much our role as a bridge, trying to provide the bridge between science and policymakers and also practitioners. And this is our main challenge, to make sure that the bridge works, that in fact there isn't a gap in the middle. We've mentioned, I mentioned the Knowledge Centre for Disaster Risk Management yesterday, but also other knowledge centres are also being developed together with policy DGs. In 2016, a knowledge centre on migration and demography, which of course has very many links with what we do on disaster management. More recently, knowledge centre on territorial policies. Again, this is more looking at regional development, investment type activities. Again, very strong links with what we're doing in disaster management. And then newer centres on bioeconomy, food safety. Again, important initiatives which a lot can be done to link to disaster risk management. I showed this slide yesterday. I just want to show it again. In fact, yesterday I focused more on knowledge in terms of the actual work on the database that I presented. Today I'm going to focus more on the innovation side and some activities that we're being developed, which we think will mainstream disaster risk management. So coming back to data, and particularly at lost data, which Johannes Luchner yesterday mentioned and Laura mentioned as key priorities for the Commission to have better data, and also I think for Member States have better data to first of all understand what risk we're facing and to help plan. Now, of course, here I think it's important that the data is collected, can be used for many different purposes. And climate change has already been mentioned, but there are also many others in the Commission, for example, those working on floods in the environment area. Also the Solidarity Fund, which, as you know, intervenes to provide assistance after a disaster, early reconstruction, which applications have to be based on good, clear data. So again, a clear need for data. The Seveso Directive, again, on chemical accidents. And of course, the global initiatives. So it's really an area where mainstreaming can be pursued to full extent. And initiative which we have started at the Joint Research Centre, again with DG ECHO and others, DG Klima, for example, is a risk data hub, which is an initiative to try and show how data from different sources can be brought together to help build up national and also international approaches on disaster risk management. And the advantage of this is that the data can be entered very much at local level if local national authorities are interested, but also it can include data which is more collected at European level. So, for example, the data which we have since 1998, I think, on forest fires, or since 2002 on floods. This is not standardized national data. It's been collected at EU level. This is already available, but this can then be complemented by local level data. And there are various ways of visualizing this, exploiting the data. It's really a new tool which we hope will be useful. It's provided countries can use it if they wish. Of course, there's no obligation to collect data on disasters in the EU, but it can be used if countries wish. Risk assessment, I think this is an area where the JRC has developed a lot of experience and skills and knowledge over different years. and which I think can be exploited for many different areas. I mean, of course, now under the Civil Protection Mechanism, risk assessment is an obligation for member states, and we hope that these will be improved over time and that science will have a greater role in developing national risk assessments. Climate change, we're working together with DG Klima, for example, to update the climate adaptation strategy, which will be based on long-term risks or estimates of impacts of the climate change in different areas. I'll come back to this in a moment. We've also developed, together with the External Action Service, a risk index looking at conflicts, which helps the Commission and or the EU, in fact, in its early warning system in relation to conflict prevention. And this is being expanded now. You may have seen last year the Commission produced, together with the EES, produced a global resilience strategy and argued that very much that looking at conflict needed to take other elements into account, particularly climate change and also other environmental factors. So we're adapting this risk index to bring into these other elements. I know that the community of Eustace has collected a lot of information and worked a lot on the area of critical infrastructure. And this is a big priority also for the Joint Research Centre in different areas, looking at terrorism, but also other risks, man-made risks that affect critical infrastructure. But we've also started to look at what climate change could mean for critical infrastructure in Europe. And this is a report produced last year by colleagues who work with me, looking at climate change over the next 70 years. It likely impacts on different critical infrastructure elements in Europe. Some of it is actually quite short term because it's looked at what the situation could be in the 2020s, which is really only tomorrow. So that's the second map on the right-hand side. And you see, in fact, enormous differences between North and South Europe. And also this report also produces enormous differences between types of infrastructure that will be affected. That transport is really the key area and the likely critical infrastructure which will be most heavily affected by climate change. Just a couple of other examples. We work on building codes, developing the background information to then work on standards for building codes. And the interesting thing here is how it can actually be linked with other work in relation to construction, so work on energy saving, renewable energy use, how buildings can actually be adapted to take account of climate change. So it's another example of mainstreaming disaster risk reduction into other policies. And my final example is looking at what we call NATEC risk assessment. This is where we look at a combination of natural hazards which can actually cascade, due to cascading effects, can cause technological disasters. And we have developed a risk assessment tool called RapidN, which can help companies to actually undertake a rapid risk assessment, looking at these different types of natural hazards, particularly earthquakes and floods, and how this can impact industrial installations. And this is quite widely used now by government and different industry associations. So I will stop there. There were just a few examples of how we are trying to mainstream disaster risk management across different areas. There are many others. But as I said, this information is available on the website, which I showed you yesterday. Thank you very much.
Ian, if you would agree, since we have just a couple of minutes, we could maybe take one or two questions, because I think there was also a lot of information in there. So I don't know if you have any questions right now before we start with the first panel. Okay, well, if there's nothing, then I would just invite the first panel on risk communication to come up to the stage.
So good morning again, and thanks a lot for coming to today's session. We have heard just now that better communication and raising awareness amongst children and adolescent people is central for reducing the risk of disasters. And it's a political priority for many countries, and it becomes also a more important priority for the Commission. And as we are painfully aware of, more than 200 people were killed by natural disasters last year in Europe, and more than 1 million hectares of forest were burned due to wildfire. So, and experts agree that the scale of lives lost, of damage done, of environmental harm done, could have been reduced if only our citizens would have been better informed what to do in case of a disaster. And that's why, at the Commission, we have also launched an initiative to raise awareness. We have started this year a roadshow called EU Saves Lives that travels different European countries. This roadshow has had 160,000 visitors so far. We will go next Friday to Rome for a 10-day stop, and then we will go on to Marseille, later to Madrid, and by the end of next year we plan to cover half of all EU member states. But much more could be done. And it's also evident that the cause of protecting our citizens from disasters requires a joint effort across all layers of government and across all types of stakeholders. My name is Frank Knecht. I'm from the DG ECHO Communication Department, and I'm joined today by a very strong panel of top experts in their fields. So let me introduce to you João Verde on my far right, from your side on the left. João is researcher and advisor to the Portuguese government, and he has got an extensive knowledge in wildfire management. And João will share his experience, and one of his points is that it's best to act and to communicate at a very, very local level. And next to João, we have Maggie Mort. Maggie is a professor at Lancaster University in the beautiful northwest of England. Maggie has a keen interest in citizen engagement and will share with us the results of a project that she has carried out recently with children from the UK, from Portugal, but also from other European countries. On my left, we have Harald Drager. Harald is president of the International Network Teams, and he will expand on the issue of education, and he will also reflect what does this mean for policy making. And finally, we have the technology provider, Emanuele Bellini from the University of Florence. Emanuele is researcher, and he took part in an EU-funded project that dealt with big data big topic. And as part of this project, also a mobile phone application was developed. Now, make yourself comfortable. We have got a long session ahead of us, and because we are not short of time, I think each panelist can also spend more time, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, explaining the results of their work. After this, we will have a short discussion amongst us panelists. Then I will open the floor to the public, and shortly before we break for lunch at 12:30, I will make also a small summary of our main findings. So, João.
Well, thank you very much, Frank, and I will be thanking the Commission for inviting me here. Well, I decided not to bring any slides, so it's so that I don't cause you death by PowerPoint, only death by speech, if that's okay. So, but the fact is that in coming here, I actually took a risk. It was, of course, a calculated risk, or better still, an educated risk. I understood it. I did what I deemed necessary to manage those risks, and therefore, here I am having minimized them. Of course, that means that I understand the risk. I understand the concept of risk, and that means I had to value something. In my view, and in the perspective of many others that I have the pleasure of be working with, risk is money and security. And people understand security, and most of all, people understand money. Maybe you remember, if you have read it, and I hope you have, The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince. People do understand money. It's not enough to say that the house is very beautiful. You have to say that the house, or in my case, the forest, has a value of X million dollars, or euros, or whatever. So, and then people will, of course, understand risk. And that it's one very important thing, as I hope will be clear after the end of my intervention. So I come here today as someone who has been researching and working on the field of wildfires and wildfire risk at that. So of course, will excuse me if I keep myself somewhat centered around the issue of wildfires. The last 12 years or so, Portugal has sported the key message that a Portugal without fires is something that depends on everyone. That's actually the slogan. Portugal without fires depends on everyone. And we have been putting that message through for the past 12 years. And think a bit about what this means at an individual level, what it means to constantly hear that the country you live in having no fires depends on everyone. From a risk communication standpoint, what we believe this means. Well, our conclusion has been that if everyone is responsible, thinking as an individual, and agencies have been telling me for the past 12 years that everyone is responsible for a Portugal without fires. So what does this mean to me? It means that if everyone is responsible, I don't really have to do my part. I can step back and keep doing whatever I do, because if I'm not doing anything, somebody else is. Because, of course, it depends on everybody. So it's the perfect excuse not to change behavior and keep doing the things that cause fires, because somebody must be doing something, okay? So in communicating risk, stressing the word everyone removes the self from the equation. And that's one of the things we'll have to manage in Portugal, of course. And then there's this other thing, which is that this message is actually and fundamentally wrong, in that fires must not and should not be removed from landscape. Wildfires, yes, they should, but fire itself shouldn't, because fire is not only a landscape modeler, but also a very efficient tool to fuel management. Fire is actually a very, very good risk management tool if done right. So in raising awareness regarding wildfire risk, we have found that the message we have been saying out loud for the past 12 years has to be changed. People have to understand it's wildfires that have to be stopped. It's not fire itself. And it's not a thing to do with everyone, but you, specifically you. It's like that Uncle Sam thing pointing at each and every one of us. It's something that has to be to depend on you, your behavior, your strategies, your good practices, and the way you value things. So that's one of the things for which we need science, communication on one hand, sociology on another, and many other sciences, is in raising awareness and making a good risk communication, making sure that the message is right, the message is correct, doesn't remove the self from the problem, and that people understand what is being said. Of course, this is all more difficult because our rural population is diminishing fast. According to some of our experts, not fast enough. Some people say our wildfire problem will be solved in the next 20 years, and I know why, because they are expecting everybody to be dead by then. If you have nobody to ignite fires, of course, the problem will be contained. But that's, of course, that's I'd say a joke somebody usually makes. But the thing is, actually, we are getting older. The landscape and the economy context has changed, but our population keeps doing whatever they usually do, unaware of that change. So they still react to risk under a very outdated view. They feel younger than they are, so they believe they can tackle fire in a way they no longer can. They no longer have the health to pursue fire and suppress it when it gets out of hand, and it does get out of hand quite easily. They underestimate hazard, and one of the reasons why they underestimate hazard is because they are unaware of hazard. And because you will not and cannot protect which you don't value. And we have been observing that our populations, and not only rural populations, but even our agencies, some of them have no grasp over concepts like susceptibility or hazard, let alone potential loss, because people many times fail to put a value on things. And if you don't put a value on whatever it is you have to protect, you will not protect it. So that's one of the issues of risk communication that has to be addressed somehow. There's no formal education on risk. So if you have no formal education on risk and you don't come across those concepts very often, you will most likely not act accordingly. So you will not protect whatever it is you have to protect, or whatever it is you live from. So people put themselves in harm's way. They don't really understand the possible outcomes of their actions. And that's one of the problems we have and we have to solve. So for that reason, we are aiming at creating risk-aware communities. And to that end, we are trying to bring risk into villages, taking stock of what we have called security officers, because we believe that security officers will create trust within their community. It's far difficult for us experts to go into a community and start speaking in a highly technical manner and trying to explain things as hazard and susceptibility and vulnerability and whatnot. people will not understand, they will close themselves. Also, it's a stranger, it's a strange person outside of the community trying to speak to them about this. So one of the ways we have found to go around this problem is to go into the villages, the communities, pick someone who is able to walk and talk, because I'm talking about communities where the average age is about 70, 80 years. So it's very important to pick a fit security officer, someone who knows everybody, is trusted by the community, somebody we can explain what things mean, the concepts, but do it in a very simple way without getting too lost in the concepts that we as researchers dear so much. Because this person, when warned beforehand, will be able to go door by door and knock and say, look, there's a problem, you should come out, let's go to a safe place we have here in the village, bring your water, your medicine, whatever food you need if you need, and let's put you in a secure place. So this is one of the ways that we are trying to work with risk communication, is to remove or find an alternate way to communicate risk to people. Not only on the media, let alone social apps, because everybody is talking about social media and apps you can have on your smartphone. But of course, an 80-year-old most likely will not have an app on their phone. He will most likely not have a smartphone, only a landline. So we have to explore other ways of communicating risk and getting to those guys and getting them out of harm's way. And then, of course, we have to close the gap between academia and society. I'm a researcher myself, so I know academia quite well. And we like to lose ourselves in complicated concepts and equations and spatial modeling. I know we do because I love that. So it's easy to understand how we get so lost in those things. But the non-researcher or the non-scientific person won't understand that. So we have to close this gap. And we have to understand, academia has to understand that we have to develop studies that are focused on people, focused on communities, to make things quite simpler so that they can understand. And we have to do one more thing, which is to incorporate knowledge into a public sector. I'm not sure how it works in all of your countries, but I can say for sure that in Portugal there's a huge divorce between academia and the public sector. It's like one doesn't need the other, they don't speak too much. They don't even meet at the end of the day to sleep together. They're completely separate. And that has to stop somehow. So we are working very hard to bring knowledge into the public sector so that there's a lessons learned process, which we have seen doesn't exist or rarely exists. And we have to have the public sector taking stock of whatever the academia produces. It's one of the vectors we are currently working on. One of the things that puzzles us, not only as researchers, but as someone or people now working on this Portuguese special unit for wildfire management, is that if people seem to understand risk in regards to the insurance sector, when you buy insurance for your car or your home or wherever, you understand risk. You know why you are buying insurance. You know there's something you value, you might lose it, so you are going to the insurance sector so that if you lose whatever you value, you will have a compensation for that. So if people, even the 80-year-old in our rural communities, understand risk through the insurance sector, why is it that they can't understand risk when it comes to the rest of their lives? It puzzles me. But that's one of the things that we have to do. And it links with another thing that worries us, and we are trying to work on that, is when public entities are trying to communicate risk with the rest of the country, there's a fear in doing so. I understand why that happens, because if you go on television and you try to communicate risk and say, look, this whatever thing is going to happen, and you are prone to lose something, what the person saying this will fear is that the journalist will get back to him with a question which might be very uncomfortable. How are you prepared to face that risk? How will you respond? Do you have all the assets you need to respond to that risk? And more often than not, the organization speaking about risk on live TV, for instance, will be very much afraid of those questions, because they will know that after a certain point, there is little to do to be protected against everything. So no matter how many means you have, how many people you have, if a hazardous phenomenon is going to strike, it's going to strike, and you're going to sustain losses. So this is very uncomfortable, and it fuels the fear that organizations have in communicating risk. So this is one of the shifts that we have to make in transforming this idea that there's a state that will protect everybody, and which will fear people asking, what are you ready to do to protect your citizens? And shifting the message and having people understand that while the state has a responsibility in protecting people, everybody, and remember the first part of my intervention when I was speaking about our slogan for the past 12 years, everybody is responsible to act. I, myself, as an individual, I have my own responsibilities, and I have to protect myself from whatever hazard I'm exposed to. I shouldn't rely only on the response of a government, on an organization, or whatever. I have to be able to do things myself, to change my behavior, to put good practices to place. So what do I have to do? I must have solutions. And that's one of the things in raising risk awareness that I believe academia, for instance, has a huge role to play. In studying how people react, in seeing what they need, what they can do to protect themselves, what good practices should they have put in place to avoid exposing themselves to risk, so that you can have this shift. To close, I can't help but remember last October when we had Hurricane Ophelia. It was supposed or predicted to have landfall on our western coast. And our risk communication was centered around, look, there's a hurricane coming, you should be expecting heavy rain. And of course, and we know this because it happens almost every time, when you go for a long period of drought and then you have the first rains announced, everybody in rural areas will burn like hell. They want to burn everything because they have to manage their fuels. And as I told you before, fire is very efficient. It's very cheap to use fire to manage fuels. So in the minds of those rural populations, they're thinking, okay, rain is coming, so I have to burn wherever there is to burn now, because after the rain, I will be unable to do so for I don't know how long. So when Ophelia came, and we were communicating that specific risk as rainfall, heavy rainfall is going to come, people started burning everything. There were ignitions all over the place. The bad luck was that, as you probably are aware, if you have read about it or heard about it somewhere, it wasn't rain, it was heavy winds, very strong winds. So ignitions got carried out of control, and it was widespread fire all over. And there's very little you can do even if you have the most prepared landscape and the most prepared people and the most prepared organizations, it's very, very difficult to manage such a situation because it's very strong winds and ignitions everywhere. So you have to communicate risk differently. You have to get closer to people. You have to make them understand that they cannot burn whenever they can or they want to. But of course, you have to give them solutions. In communicating risk, it's not enough to say, look, you cannot burn. You have to give them some different opportunities. You have to go to them and say, if you want to manage this risk, if you don't want to get exposed to the probable outcomes of burning, you have these options. I can go and burn with you at a later date, for instance. So you have to get closer to people, understanding their needs, and in the specific, even though I understand, or I believe that several things I spoke about right now are applicable to a wide range of risks, in the specifics of wildfires, we clearly have to get very close to people, give them opportunities, tell them, look, here's what you can do, here's what you cannot do, and getting close to communities, taking stock of security officers, people they trust, people they listen to, will be far more effective than coming on TV, which is good and should continue, and saying things that most of them will most likely won't interpret right. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I would be anyway concluding this. I don't know if I took 10 minutes, probably not. But I will be concluding, and we'll be taking questions when it's time for them. Thank you.
Here we go. I think it was a very insightful presentation, João, and just for my understanding, I think there were so many interesting topics you touched upon. But just as an immediate question I have, we all know we live in an aging society, and I think aging is particularly accentuated in the rural areas. Also in my home country, Germany, but in Portugal it seems to be even much more progress than that. When we talk of all the victims that we saw last year in Portugal, was it predominantly senior citizens who fell victim to the fires, or was it more dispersed amongst the age groups? I don't know. This mine. Yeah.
Well, I will be using this anyway. No, there wasn't a concentration on any specific age group, because most of the deaths occurred in an event in June and then another in October, and the elderly were of course very predominant, but you had victims all over the different age groups. So people that were on vacation were caught. People visiting family were caught as well. But if you look outside of these very severe phenomena, you have victims of older ages predominantly. There you have, not in the October events, but all over the year. Usually the elderly are victims because they want to manage fuels, and then they get caught by fire.
Thank you very much. That's very, very, very useful indeed. So now I would like to ask Maggie to the lectern. Maggie will talk about another age group, the opposite end, that is also particularly vulnerable to disasters.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's great to be here. For the last 3 years, I've been coordinating CuiDar, which is a project which I hope you will see when you see the film, which we're going to show imminently, is not aimed at children, it's aimed at us all. So one of our deliverables, a major deliverable, is this film, and we're going to show it now. You might need to turn your chairs around so that you can...
Luego pues vino mi madre My brothers, who were younger than me, tried to calm me. Then my mother came and we went into the street when the second tremor happened. The glass panes from the street started to fall on top of us. I was really afraid then. I had an image of the earthquake, like it was a monster for me. I was always afraid to go indoors at home.
Cuidar means take care in both Spanish and Portuguese. We aim to change disaster management through the voices of children and young people.
I didn't know there would be a flood, so all my toys were on the floor and stuff, and I had really bad dreams about it. I just feel scared because I don't want it to flood again.
Emergency plans need to be culturally sensitive and reflect how they will be used in different communities and different places. But we found that children and young people are missing from these plans.
When adults make decisions, they should think about how their decisions will affect children.
More importantly, we found that many authorities are unaware that children have a right to participate in decisions that affect them, and so continue to be excluded.
They give guidelines for what you have to do when there's an earthquake. Cover yourself with something, go out into the street, all that. But emotionally, we haven't been given any guidelines, or they haven't developed that part. So, what we want to say to the experts is that we want to work with the emotional part as well.
Children see their environment in particular ways, so if their insights are taken into account, disaster plans would be more effective. We know this from working with more than 500 children across Europe. We've found that some have great ideas and offer important insight into how to improve planning for their own community and beyond.
We children sometimes have ideas that we can give to adults.
If you put floodgates down, it won't happen to your house.
We never know if we are ready for these disasters, and it's always good to learn more about them.
We wanted to influence those who put together disaster plans and show politicians, policymakers, and community leaders how to embrace children's knowledge. The project was a collaboration between academics and a major charity, Save the Children. In more than 400 hours of workshops, we listened to the views of children and young people, gathered their ideas and experiences.
We've worked with fires. We write what we think on the blackboard.
We met the civil protection volunteers. We had our map that we made during the project, and we showed them the important places for us, where we meet with our friends, to the schools, and to the places where there are landslides or risk of floods.
In Greece, we worked with children who were hard of hearing and others who had visual impairments. Some of the children were fascinated to explore firefighting equipment just with their hands.
Hello everyone, we are the 6th year pupils from the Portucavela School in Gandesa. Today we have invited experts and the Mayor to explain the project and find solutions and have them listen to what we have to say.
Mutual learning events brought together young people and community leaders to exchange ideas in a way that had never happened before. They were able to listen to each other, to understand each other's experience and give value to each other's knowledge.
They managed to identify problems, were very demanding and critical, but above all, they have reflected.
Today, it was the formal event of our final product. We met the Mayor and people of other organisations and discussed the topic we wanted to highlight: how to intervene in emergency situations and the knowledge of the risks in our territory.
The whole CoU project has been enlightening. That old myth that we want to protect children, we can't tell them bad news, well, it's completely wrong. They are very resilient people and they can learn from knowing about a risk and preparing for a risk.
After 3 years, with children involved at every stage, we've developed a child-centred disaster management plan for Europe. The plan has 3 forms: watch, learn, and act. Through film, written reports, and a set of tools, the insights of young people can now transform disaster planning.
CoU has been a really important project to help children understand their role in society, to help them to become active citizens. When children experience a disaster or emergency, we know that the impact on them is lasting. And so involving them when we're making plans for their safety, helping them become prepared, increasing their resilience, will have a huge impact on children and also the services that we're able to provide.
The wildfires tearing through the parched forests of central and northern Portugal have claimed dozens of lives and made many more homeless.
In the long term, we hope this new plan will help create a safer and more secure society. Disasters are on the increase, and if we can implement inclusive emergency planning, lives will be saved. So I've just got a few minutes to talk through, very briefly, the framework that we developed with the children for a child-centred emergency plan for Europe. And as you saw, we identified with children risks that they recognised in their communities. And it was very important that children themselves got to start this project by defining what disaster means for them, what counts as disaster for them. And these are the risks that they identified. Clearly, you've seen some of these in the film. This picture is a group of young people who identified living near a chemical plant as their major risk that they live with every day. So they wanted to explore that chemical plant, and that's a picture of them going around the plant and learning about what happens there and asking difficult questions. They identified a wide range of risks, including different kinds of fires. Domestic fires were also very important, particularly for groups of refugee children. Thank you. Next slide. Oh, it's me, sorry. Creating dependency here. So the workshops showed critically that children want to know. They want to learn about risk. As someone just said earlier, there is no formal risk education program. Actually, this project is aimed at adults as well as children. It's aimed at educating adults about the sensibilities and the knowledge and the experiences and the insights of children. But also, children did ask us, why is there no formal education about risks? They want to know what to do in public spaces, and I'll come to this in a moment. And they want to play a role in building community resilience because critically, children are still marginalised from this field. They're not included when we draw up emergency plans. It's not something that occurs to us. So the framework that we've developed is quite straightforward, it's quite simple, but it comes from much work and it's underpinned by very detailed reports which are on our website and contained in references in our report. I've brought a few copies with me. So just to touch on each step along the way, challenge adult imaginaries about and prejudices about childhood. It's quite shocking when we learned that the Latin derivation of child is actually infans, one who is unable to speak. So what does that tell you about how that informs our approach to children and young people? They're unable to speak. Clearly they are able to speak. So in what way do we cast a young person as a child? So to challenge that, that's a kind of mindset that we feel needs to inform this whole framework. Create high-quality participation and to increase opportunities for children to have their voices heard and create change. So it may be difficult for you to imagine ways in which you work which could create those spaces, those spaces which would encourage the participation of young people. So in our report, we detail ways to do this, and toolkits, if you like that term, steps along the way, ways to create child-friendly spaces in which adults and children can exchange knowledge about risk. We were shocked when we carried out this project and spoke with many, many adults in this field, who work in this field in different domains, how little understanding and knowledge there was of the UN Charter on the Rights of the Child, particularly Article 12. And I'm so glad that Virginia mentioned yesterday the Sendai framework, which touches on this, and also Philippe, who mentioned how we need to widen this field to include citizens. But actually, children and young people are still not regarded as citizens by many organisations. And yet, actually, they have the right to participate in issues that affect them, in decisions that affect them. That right exists. So they are not citizens of the future, they are citizens now. And that right is very poorly understood by people in disaster management fields. And yet, when we introduced that right in our workshops with adults and children, it was quite empowering for the adults concerned and for the children. So here we have a legislative framework, we have a point of reference, and we can use this to inspire our work. Create opportunities for intergenerational exchanges and cultural memory. So this is very important. Children want to play a part in their communities. They're very concerned about people with disabilities, people who may be older, who may have mobility problems. They know where all those people are in their communities. They notice things. So they like discussing with older people about memories of disasters. It's a way of informing themselves about risk and lowering their own anxieties about risk. It's very important to communicate and explain carefully about risks with children. So there is a perception that there are things we shouldn't be discussing with children that are too difficult, that are too distressing. But actually, there's research which shows that children can manage most topics if those topics are targeted in the right way, in proportionate way to their age and maturity. And that's a question of us as adults actually learning how to do that. So build and rely on a more diversified network of children's allies. That's you. This is very important. Those advocates who work with children are usually their parents, their teachers, maybe social workers. But actually, the relationships that young people have with significant adults in their lives who are not those actors are really important. We found in the mutual learning exercises that you saw in the film that those exchanges with firefighters, with civil protection volunteers or professionals or policymakers, the mayor, they were very important for those children. They create a very significant bank of memories about risk and what is being done in society to minimize risk and to reduce the risk of disasters. And that also reduces their anxiety about disasters. And those relationships, you can be allies with those children and young people. And those are not allies that are normally thought of, but they're very important. Recognise the need to work with emotion, such as fear and anxiety, came over very strongly in this work, not because children are vulnerable per se. Children have vulnerabilities and capacities, as we all do. But children noticed that when they examined their local plans, their school plan, their community plan, if they had one, or the local disaster plan, which we were able to show to them, that they didn't include anything about how to manage fear, how to manage anxiety. If you've been through a disaster, you have anxiety about a future disaster, particularly with things like flooding, which can, just be perennial. How to manage that anxiety is not included in emergency planning, which is a huge gap, but they identified that. And this is a case rather like with the disability rights movement, where an improvement in that kind of aspect of planning benefits us all, not just children, but it took the young people to point this out. And finally, just to make this point about public space, which was very, very interesting, and came from the children. Everything here comes from the children. First of all, children told us that when they are out in a public space, so they're returning from school, they're coming back from a social event, they're out with their friends, that when there are no adults present, and we're talking about young people, teenagers perhaps, that they don't really know what to do if there is a disaster, if there is an emergency. They feel particularly vulnerable in public spaces. So that's one thing. But then when we went a little deeper into this issue of public space, we started, you saw in the film that groups of children went out in their towns and mapped their environment and showed places where they feel comfortable, where they don't feel comfortable, places that they think are hazardous, places where they go with their friends. It's worth considering how child-friendly, young person-friendly are our public spaces. It's a design issue, it's a larger issue perhaps for local planners. So those are the key steps which we advocate if you want to make a child-friendly, a child-centred disaster management plan, and that was our other key deliverable. Those are the steps that you can take along the way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maggie, and congratulations for that successful project. So next on the left and left, Carol.
Thank you, Frank, and good morning, everybody. I will address you from my point of view from the International Emergency Management Society. So on education and communication. And first of all, I give you a little bit background who we are. Maybe many of you don't know us, but actually we are an organization which are 25 years last month. And we were established in Washington, D.C. 25 years ago, but we are now registered as an international not-for-profit NGO here in Brussels. I've been involved in all this 25 years. Now this is my main activity. And we are a forum for education, training, certification, and policy in emergency management. We are not operational in any disasters, but we try and focus on disaster preparedness. How can we do things better in order to reduce the consequences? What do? We do conferences and workshops around the world every year. And we participate in research project, and we have an education initiative, which I will tell you about. This year, we move over, we have 14 chapters around the world, so we are quite international. This year, we will have our annual conference in Manila, in the Philippines. We move around the world. And we recently, last month, was a co-organizer by our Chinese chapter to a large conference in Chengdu. This was a memorial conference of the Wenchuan earthquake, which took place in 2008, where there was 86,000 lost or dead people. So this was a very tragic event. And this conference gathered about 1,300 specialists from all over the world. The main focus was, of course, earthquake science, but also a lot was dedicated to search and rescue activities and emergency management in general. We are volunteers, and with all we have then the chapters around the world have their own boards, and altogether we have about 100 volunteers working in different countries for promoting and expanding the organization. We have a secretariat, small secretariat here in Brussels. So much about the background. What I will address you on today is observations I've done through the years, also by participating in EU project. We have been involved either as a partner or in capacity of advisory boards, user boards on EU project. And I've also been an evaluator of projects. So that's the background on that. I will also tell you a little bit about a project we participate in now, which I think is quite interesting and important, and some initiatives which we are taking. And I will relate what I say to something which was mentioned yesterday, actually research project dissemination, standardization, and this database Jan told us about today. Let's see if we can move. That was not my slides. Is it yours? We go backward. Yeah, we go backward. That's right. Okay, I will address you on these. Where do we find? No, doesn't work very well. There we go. There we go. Okay, I will address you on these 5 points. Actually, I'm a believer that education might solve most of the problems we see worldwide. If people are educated, they will also act more reasonably. So education is a must. And this is also in emergency and disaster management. Point 2, which I will address on, is how can we learn from each other? We always talk about this, but how do we do it in real life? And I will give you some examples from a World Bank project on civil protection worldwide, which we participate in. And how do we get a real cooperation worldwide? This is an initiative we have taken, I'll tell you a little bit about. And the last one is that we have also taken an initiative to develop an international certification of emergency management and disaster response. Okay, first back to education. In the EU projects today, there is a requirement with dissemination. This was mentioned yesterday, it's mentioned again in the opening today. And dissemination is very good. However, what it happens to be, and in reality, is presentations at different conferences around the world, and the CV of the one presenting is increasing, good for him or her, but we should actually put up, or the Commission should put up a stronger requirement saying how, when you plan and do the project, how will you feed the results of the project back into the education system? And just mention what Maggie said, and I will comment a little bit later on that too, but we should also aim for education of children on the risk. So you could even say, how do the different projects produce educational material in terms of courses, programs, both for practitioners and also for the academy, but also for children. These could be set up by the Commission as something that should be addressed in a call. Could probably lead to more use of the results of the projects. Yeah, so much about education. I will tell you a little bit about the project, which I think is important, where we will also try to use this demand, I know, feedback to the Commission. how can we use the results of this project into learning material courses, because I think this is a very good initiative taken by the World Bank. The World Bank has started a project, as you see here. We do a Teams is a partner here, and it's the aim is state of civil protection in the world, typologies, good practice, and economic return, to deepen the understanding. How does the different civil protection agency work worldwide? That was also mentioned this morning, and I think the Commission, some part of Commission is also involved in this project. But what is the, let me look at the next one. Yeah. The study is, there is a desk study, which is now almost finished. And this covers different parts of the world with what is the general trend of the different civil protection around the world. In addition, there will be deep dive studies of the countries shown below. It's UK, France, Australia, Japan, USA, New Zealand, Ukraine, and for developing countries, Chile, Mexico, Bangladesh, Senegal, Turkey, Morocco, Cambodia, India, and China. But the study aims to cover most parts of the world. And with this, for example, the UK study is already finished, and it puts focus on how have UK developed their civil protection, which has been developed over time. How is it organized? And there are some interesting comments which I think Virginia will like to see. Because seen from the outside, not from yourself, you get a better view what is good or bad when you look at this to all of them. The second thing that will be done is also an economic study. What is the return of investment? Very difficult, but I think it's important because I've worked in safety 50 years, and it's always been a challenge how to get investment in safety, how to prove that this is actually a gain. The last part of the study will also be an opinion study in the different countries. How does the people that is having this service, how do they value their civil protection? I think the outcome of this study is very important. In the World Bank, it's the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery Group, which is responsible for the study. And we will, as a partner, try to influence that this report or the different reports can be made available as teaching material, because I think in here we find a lot of interesting things. So we could try to come up with an example which again could be used for EU in the demand on the different project calls. Yeah, and we have, then I said we go into some initiatives we have taken. We have taken one initiative which we call Teams International Education and Network of Excellence. This have to be related to the certification initiative we have taken. We know that around the world, both in universities, training center, educational institution, there is a lot of interesting and good material of emergency and disaster management available. But not in all countries. And we are very ambitious, trying how can this education material be shared with those who have nothing or have little of this. So we try to build a network which then can share this, and in this certification we will then aim for candidates for certification that they either can get these courses online or that they can actually travel around, because I do believe that being around and see the different culture is a value in itself. This is an initiative just started, so we are in dealing with 3 universities which have said they were interested, and we are then tracking what kind of education can they provide, putting into this pool of education. Things go slowly because there is, of course, a lot of competition also between universities, but we think that we can break this barrier by having someone as a start. As we say, do we have 1, we get 2, do we have 2, we get 4. And we are in negotiation with 3 universities, 1 in South Africa, 1 in France, and 1 in Nigeria. And it's important that we also have from the developing countries, because there's a lot to learn on community resilience from countries which have little of equipment and other emergency management material. Coming to the last point, this TQC, we have called it certification in qualification in international emergency and disaster management. And what we aim for, we heard all the discussion about standardization yesterday. And was it the good, the bad, and the ugly was presented yesterday? Yes, when we started out with this, we got, the first comment was, you can never have anyone to agree on a standard. So what did we do? We said, okay, we do not call this a standard. We call it a shared understanding of emergency management systems, etc. A shared understanding would probably be better to get through. Of course, what we will look at is different standards, guidelines, whatever is available. And we have started this work. I will show you a little bit about the principles here. But first of all, we have a big and active chapter in China. And China, I've been traveling China for 24 years, and it's developed tremendously. Today, they have both the power and the money, and emergency management is a high focus. Before, the different ministries in China had the responsibility for the different type of emergencies, like earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, etc. Just recently, China has now put on top of all this ministry, one ministry called the Emergency Management Ministry. And I know there are some dealings between the EU and China, but I would encourage even more of this, both because China need all this. There are a lot of people. And one thing, they look very much, from my experience, towards FEMA material. And one thing they have just included is certification, a community emergency response team, because they like to engage the communities. I think, and I will encourage EU to be even more active in communication with China on these things. Back to our certification. This is the loop of how a certification will take place. I don't go in detail on this, but I will get you focus on what will be the reference, what will we certify against. So we have started to look global standards and best practices, and this work has been started. It's a document handling like this, but the most important thing is what do we certify against? And we will then look at all the disaster circles, all the phases of the disaster circles, but also risk management, which is inherent in this emergency management. It's quite ambitious project. We do it on a voluntary basis because we are a voluntary organization, but we do not mind having support and cooperation from EU. We have just recently got the support from European Academy of Science, which thinks this is a good idea and like to support this initiative. But more cooperation and support is wanted from this. Yeah, one more thing which I like to mention is we did a survey before we started this on what does people think, or people working in the emergency management field on this, what do they think about a new certification like a global thing like this? And we got a response from 32 countries. The survey is still out there, so if someone else like to give their opinion, I can give a link to it. But it was an overwhelming positive feedback, they think, and those who have responded said 50% of them that they could also be interested in this certification. We know there exist few certifications around the world, one similar to this, more acting only at the practitioners, is the International Association of Emergency Managers in US. But we see this as something that can be added on to existing local certification. So it's not in competition with existing certification, but it's added on. And through this survey, we got a lot of good feedback. Everybody answered, gave us actually real good opinion, and we are overwhelming with the positive response. The last thing I like to say is when we talk about courses and education in emergency and disaster management, I think if you go around the world and look at some there is available there, you find professors repeating and repeating old things, not always developing things. And we think it's important when we do this, and the courses for this certification is mostly to be part of this team and network we are establishing. We are not trying to make up all these courses ourselves, but we work in cooperation with existing courses. But that courses are up to date, state of the art, is an important thing. And this again goes back to mentioned in the beginning. We have to see how new methods, new technology is fed back into the education system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harald. And I think my colleagues have taken note of your plea to make education more prominent in the dissemination work package of research projects. As we all know, the Commission last month only has proposed to substantially increase the research funding from 80 billion under the current MFF to 100 billion after 2020, and that is actually more than a 25% increase, because at the moment the excellent British universities take up a lot of the big chunk of the research money, and that will not be the case in the future. So what it means is that the Commission is willing to pump a lot of funds into the system. And I can only recommend to all of you to look at the DG Research websites. There are excellent tools and tips on how to design a good dissemination work package, and there are also very good tips on how to make education a strong. There are good radio programs, like in Britain it's Science in Action. There's also radio programs in Germany. There's a possibility to work with universities. There are plenty of opportunities, and you can propose them in your work package, and the Commission will look at it very well. The evaluators will look at it obviously with a very favorable mindset. So in the true spirit of user-centered design, we first have discussed all the different user needs, and then at the very end, we will have the technology provider. So Emanuele, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to introduce you the results of the Resolute project that just finished 1 month ago. And the project was funded under the RS7 3 years ago under the Resilience Disaster Management. In this project, we did a lot of things. This time, I'm going to focus only on one piece of the cake, in particular on the technological aspects, and then we can discuss a bit how the technology can be accepted by the end users, and who are our end users. So first of all, the outcome of the project are mainly 4, the European Resilience Management Guidelines, with the focus on critical infrastructures, because this was the topic of the call. The CRAMS is a collaborative resilience management support system. So we realize that it's important that different actors talk together daily, not only each time that something happens, but daily, in order to share information, in order to enhance their capability to respond to emergency. The mobile emergency app is a mobile application connected to the CRAMS that is able to provide to end users, in this case a citizen, valuable information to support their local decisions during emergency. And the last one is the game-based training app, because we realized that to enhance their risk perception or risk awareness, we needed to follow a different approach, not just teaching in a face-to-face or something like that, but we use the game tool, something like learning with fun. Okay, the project is based on big data. Big data is our core of the whole solution, and we are lucky because in Florence, the project had 2 pilots, in Athens and in Florence, but in particular in Florence, the city invested a lot of money in Internet of Things and sensors and traffic management systems, something like that. So we have a lot of information. And on the university side, I'm from University of Florence, we work a lot on a platform. So in this way, we are able to exploit the information that usually sometimes happen that the city invests money in IT, IoT, technologies, but no one is able to exploit this information. Or local university have a platform, but the city is not prepared to provide information to use these big data tools. So in Florence, actually, we have this very nice situation. And all the information generated by the city that's come from environmental sensors, weather conditions, and let's say utilities, traffic flows, and people flows detected through Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. In the city, we cover more than 80% of the territory with the public Wi-Fi. We are able to detect all this kind of information, apply some data mining, and extract valuable information. For who? For decision makers, for civil protections, for this measure of the city. So it depends of the end user. We are able to extract, we are able to provide a different dashboard in order to provide the valuable information for them. At the bottom line, we have the big data layer that with a lot of process that continuously collecting also in real time information from the city. In the middle layer, we have several applications. So the layers are totally decoupled. So we can extend the platform in the vertical and horizontal way. And on top, we have the dashboard that can be tailored according to the end user needs. So this is an example of the dashboard that we designed for the city council and the civil protection in the project. What is very important, according to user-centered design approach, we select only the information that they actually need to enhance their daily decisions, not something that just to show something or just to have for provide colors on a screen. So what is important is to talk with the first responders to understand what they need and what they are lacking now to enhance their capability to cope with an emergency. So in this case, we select several information that range from social media collection, so we have a Twitter vigilance tool, real-time people flow on the ground, traffic management system, and also we have in real time the people that are in the emergency room according to the colors assigned for the gravity of the injuries. So we know, for instance, if an hospital is overcrowded or not in real time. We also have in real time the number of the kids that are at school. So it is very useful to staffing the first responders during an emergency, because if you know in the school there are 3 kids instead of 3,000 or 300, it's different, and it could have could need different solutions in emergency. Okay, this is an example of how we can detect people in Florence. The heat map show the people concentration. We have other screen shots in which we are able to detect the people movement, so the trajectories, so we can predict where the people are and where the people will go, and according to the historical data, but also in this way we monitoring how the people behave during the emergency. This is very important because the lack of knowledge during the emergency is critical, and in this way we can guide first responders in order to enhance their effectiveness in saving people. This is another example, is applied to social media, like in this case Twitter, because also Twitter is a very good let's say signal, if properly analyzed, that can be used for early warning, because the people that are on the ground can act as a sensor themselves. If they are, in particular, if they have the right responsibility, as we explained before, my colleagues, the right responsibility to look around them, and a sort of a civic responsibility, they can immediately signal that something is going wrong. So what is important here is to detect not big one signals, because once the signal is big, maybe everybody already aware that something happens, but the weak signals that deviate from the usual trend. So this is a challenging for data scientists, let's say. And then we also create a tool, the evacuation decision support system. Also, this is very important because sometimes happen that the people have a wrong knowledge about what is surrounding them, in particular about where are the safe area in which they should collect, because, okay, civil protection knows, but the people don't know. And what is very important in this case is to support this local decision during the emergency. And in particular, but this is what addressed in a different way, what is very important is to change the wrong heuristics. Heuristic is something that is very grounded in the people that maybe come from past experience, but for instance, if you think about climate change, past experience is not longer valid, because in particular in Florence, we are experiencing a strong storm that no one recognized in the past, and no one don't know how to deal with that. Or in particular happens, for instance, that in the roof, people have some installment, some stuff for, let's say, for heat outside during the summer time and something like that. So the strong storm destroyed and fallen down this stuff on the street. Okay, the citizen realized that, okay, it's happened, but maybe it's happened once. Then I recreate the same risk situation because they not expected it could happen, because this, okay, it's very strange and never happened in the past, so why should happen in the future? So it could be the unique. It's not the unique. In Florence, we are experiencing climate change. A lot of the trees in our park, we have a Cascine Park, was destroyed, and also the park is affected by the storm, and the trees are a risk for the citizen. But this is something new for us. 30 years old, 30 years in the past, was not a risk. The park is perfectly safe. Was perfectly safe. Okay. So evacuation DSS is able to detect people on the ground and then guide them in the safe area according to the context. So according to the real-time situation, so according to the status of the traffic, according to the capability of the people to walk or not, because you cannot send a safe trip to someone that cannot run, for instance, so, or if he's on a white sheet. So it's very important to tailor the capability of the people. Otherwise, the risk is that the technology is unuseful. So what is important, we focus in three aspects: group-wise evacuation, personalized, and collaborative. This is also a very important thing. So if I'm able to save someone else, I can say this to the system, so the system take into account my capability and can ask to me to bring other people with them and to bring them to the safe area. This is very important because in this way we can manage the rescue, not only waiting for the first responders, but also the citizen can behave, can act in favor of the other people that needs help. So if I'm able to save someone that is close to me, I'm very more effective than the if I'm waiting for first responders that arrived. Okay, so if we are able to collect different information from the citizen according to their different capability, we can optimize their engagement during the emergency. Then we create the mobile application. Of course, the mobile application is something that can be improved, etc. But what is important is that through mobile application, the citizen receive the path, but also other informations that could come from the people surround them. This is some screenshot. There is a chat. There is a map. So some features that everybody became to be familiar even more. Okay, so nothing strange. So very standard way to interact with the app. There is also a SOS button, because could happen the mobile application. Through the mobile application, we could signal if I'm injuries and the position of where I am. This is something that is used using Twitter in the past during the tsunami and the other big events. But now we can create something that can be more precise through the GPS position, name, surname, who I am, and something like that can be informed the civil protection or first responders about the situation, about my situation. Okay. Okay, so I select my position. The system asks if there are someone around me, close to me, that could save me. Then I will wait. I should wait for the rescue, and I inform that the rescue are arriving, because this is another important information that is usually lacked. So, for instance, when you call the ambulance and no one knows where the ambulance is while you are waiting for it. So which is the distance, how many minutes they needs to arrive. Okay, so this is very important for who wait, and also the people that are willing to save someone else knows where the people is. Okay, the people is placed. We train this, we use these technologies in Florence, and we engage civil protection people, and we made an experiment in an area that is usually affected by flooding, and we engage 30, 40 volunteers for that moving around the city with the tablet, with the messages, and some other simulated to be injuries. So the technology is valid. In particular, the platform is already up and running, so the TRL of the solution is not at experimental level, but in particular, the platform is close to be sold on the market. So we are quite advanced in this stage. And a part of this, the technology is something that needs to be accepted by the community, because, okay, we can develop a lot of things, but if no one is willing to use it, is useless. In particular, during an exercise in Florence, on a civil protection exercise in an area that is a high risk of flooding, we made a surveys during the exercise with the citizens that are walking around and just look at for curiosity or whatever. And also we made a questionnaire to the business, to the shops that are close to the exercise. And the surprise is that the results was that the majority of the citizen and the business people were against of the exercise. Why? Because the exercise stopped the business, stopped the transport, stopped everything. So this is critical, because we need more exercise to prepare, to enhance the preparedness of the citizen, but on the other hand, they are against, they are not willing to participate. They look at the exercise as something that stops their daily life. This is critical, this is something that needs to be changed. Another interesting thing that we found from the survey is that the citizen tends to overestimate their capability to save themselves. This is another critical point, because, and they tend, and this another aspect is that they tend not to follow authoritative information. They don't trust to the authoritative information. This is another critical point, because they say, I know how to do during the emergency, but we have other questions in which they reveal absolutely they are not prepared to anything. So they have wrong heuristics, they are not prepared, but they are against to exercise, and they consider themselves ready to react. So I agree, a lot of work to do at a different level, technology level, but also cultural level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. Thank you very much. So before I open the floor to the audience, there are a couple of questions that I would like to pose myself. And the first recurring theme I noticed was the question of value. João mentioned it very early at this panel discussion that this is a crucial question to ask. How much do you value your safety and the safety of your citizens? And also Harald, he talked about the return on investment. And I'm pretty sure that Emanuele also would like to know how to monetize and then how to fix the value for the solutions that he and fellow researchers are developing. So could we expand a little bit this question on value? João, can I give this very broad question to you?
Easier. People don't like to put value on other people. So if we're speaking about return on investment, which is interesting view, you will have to make calculations on return of investment for making other people safe. So you would have to put a value on people's lives. And that's one of the things nobody likes to do, even though we know it's done. The insurance sector actually does it, as we all know. But the thing is, for the most part, I understand that organizations don't really know the value at stake. They have no idea what they are protecting. It's not only about the local villages or communities. Even higher up, government organizations actually, they don't know exactly what they are protecting. I recall working with the forest sector, and the National Forest Authority several years back was unable to tell me the value of forest stands. We had pine trees and some other oaks and, well, many of the forest stands we had. And I insisted for them to give me a value on those stands. How much will it cost if we have to replant? What is the value of these stands in the current market? And they wouldn't tell me. Nobody knew. And the ones that knew the value wouldn't say because of tax and because it's because of their business model, because secret is key in the business world. So I find it extremely difficult to find the value, and you have to find the value. You have to value things because that's how you manage risk, at least in my opinion. How can you prioritize what to do if you don't know where to go? Because you don't know what the value is. And if you don't want to consider value only in euro bills, you can consider it in intangible values. But nobody knows. How can you prioritize? So this is a huge conundrum we have to solve somehow, because without value, you will not manage risk. That's I firmly believe you will not do it if you don't know the money you have there.
Thank you very much, João. I fully agree. Harald, you travel the whole world. How do the people outside Europe do it?
First of all, the economic evaluation, the return of investment in the civil protection project is not finished yet. So sharing that with you, all this documentation will be open. There are existing some drafts, which I can share if you keep it for yourself. But on this return of investment, they know themselves it's a challenge, but they will try, and then we can share it. It's not available. But I have one thought when I listen to you, João, and that's the insurance industry. Where are the insurance industry? They are used to deal with economic turns, and but they are never present when we discuss technology. So they are purely, as I see it from the past, only interested in the money flow. But to get them on the scene, being more involved also on the technology side, I don't know, I think that could be a good idea. But it was interesting to hear that the Commission has increased the investment in research to 100 billion. So at least the Commission has seen the value of return of investment in safety and resilience. That's what I can say.
Thanks a lot for this kind words, Harald. I see Emanuele wants to chip in.
Well, for us, the value proposition is quite clear in terms of if you optimize the number of people, let's say fire brigade, that go out for an emergency, you reduce the cost. Because what is important, what is sometimes happen is the magnitude of the event, how many people needs to be rescued, and there is any other that already arrived. For instance, this is very common because first responder usually works as a silos, and sometimes it happens that 2, 3, 4 different first responders arrives in the same place with spending resources and without any kind of coordination among them. Or sometimes arrive only one and need to wait others that arrive. So if you, using technology, let's say, if you coordinate first responders at the city level, for instance, you reduce the cost of the intervention, you optimize the use of human resources, for instance. And another way to see the value is related to the decision makers. So if the city, the political level, knows how the city is used by the citizen and by tourists, for instance, in Florence we have 12 million of tourists each year. So sometimes the number of the person in the city is double respect to the citizen in relation to the tourist. So how to organize the public transport system, how to organize the security of the tourist, how to organize the cleaning of the street, for instance. So all these elements affect the cost of the city as a whole and also affect the taxes. So if you optimize knowing where the people are, how the city is used and something like that through technologies, and in particular the benefit for the risk is clear because just think about if the streets are not clean because the waste is there for 1, 2, 3 days and a flooding happens, the impact is not related only to the water, but also to the waste that is on the street. So the risk increase if the city is not managed properly. Okay, so mitigate the risk means to manage the risk, the city properly.
Thanks a lot, Emanuele. Maggie, you have been talking a lot with children, so I guess when they talk about value, it's not necessarily in monetary terms, but I think this issue also came across in your project.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I would say generally that value is not necessarily always an economic issue. You could construct the question in different ways. The value is not necessarily an absolute, but sometimes a relative question. If you measure everything in absolute terms, you can do that, but it involves a number of compromises in order to make that kind of measurement work. What is reconstructed after a disaster tells a very strong story about what is valued in that community and how that community is valuing things, and not just in economic terms. And to refer to the project, just an example from Italy, children who had been evacuated from their community because of an earthquake spent many, many years, Aquila, I think there's many, many years in porta cabins, in temporary school accommodation. And what they told through the project, the city authorities, they valued was their old school. They wanted to return to their old school. So it's another version of value.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And the second question I would like to ask the panelists is the issue of learning from others, and then especially Maggie and Harald, they go at length to reach out to people that we don't necessarily talk to. Harald has a very big Miles and More account, and Maggie speaks to people that tend to be forgotten when we talk about civil protection. And there, what struck me is that on the one hand, we have got these fancy technologies. The Commission also loves fancy technologies. I spoke at the beginning about our roadshow, EU Saves Lives. We use virtual reality as an experience to teleport people into a disaster, an emergency situation, and somehow to use this technology to raise awareness. We talk about mobile phone apps. There's a whole digitalization program going on, but then there's also a big value in personal contacts. João is identifying people in Portuguese villages that go house to house, and you also do this a lot. And this is a question I want to ask: how does it work together? The technology and the personal. Maybe Maggie, I can ask you to give it a start.
Well, these young people were incredibly techno-savvy, so they were inventing all kinds of apps and ways of communicating using mobile devices, and they are streets ahead of us. So technology is really, really important in our project. I also know during our finale event 10 days ago in Lisbon, a group from the Grenfell Tower Recovery Project was using virtual reality with young people to reimagine the space when the tower comes down. And so these redesigning, reimagining of public spaces involving children and young people are really, really important. Learning from others, I think that's where the question started. Who is other? We are learning from each other. We are learning from young people. Young people are learning from us. It's the othering that I think is sometimes the problem here. And in the ways that children are othered, they tend to be seen as victims, vulnerable, a problem. There's one UK document which puts children in with pets as a problem to be rescued, a kind of issue to be dealt with. So there's a form of othering that goes on, which I think is probably better that we just use a different term and learn from each other rather than others.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Harald, you...
Yeah, I like also to go down to children. I agree fully with Maggie. The kids, they learn much faster than us. So one point to you, there's a road show. Do you invite children to come and look at the technology? Oh, you do? Okay, that's good. Because we had a drive in Norway on environmental issues. And I have a 12-year-old, so he came home and tell me about how to sort garbage. And if I fail to do that, he tells me immediately. So the kids, they are dedicated when they learn a new thing. So I so fully agree with Maggie. We need to focus more on teaching the kids also on risk, how to live with risk, and what do you do in the case of risks. We have all those stories from the tsunami in 2004, when one girl saved her whole family because she had learned in school about tsunamis. I think she was 11, 12 years old. So going to kids is very important. We have another drive in Norway, maybe overall Europe now, and that's about plastic. So all the beaches in Norway have been cleaned now by kids, also adults. And we find when we open the fish, especially we have some sharks coming up in Norway, some whales, and we find a lot of plastic in them. And kids are engaged in the new things they learn. So they are the future. So I'm not afraid of taking new technology into use, but we have to let them, like Maggie is doing in her project.
João, some thoughts on technology?
Oh yeah, I have a few. To keep it short. For ages, we used to sit down in family after dinner or whatever occasion it was and speak
more or less freely, and knowledge would go from the parents to the kids. Well, nowadays, grandparents have to install WhatsApp and Viber to speak with their grandkids. So it's a reversal we are watching. So nowadays, we probably, of course, we have to target kids. It's very effective to target kids because kids will transmit the information that they have by contagion. So if in previous years we used to learn from our from the elder, now it's a reversal. We have to target kids and hope that kids somehow try to reach their parents and their grandparents and have them change their practices so they are more protected, so they change their behaviors. That's the way I believe we can use technology. Older people being not so keen on new technologies, perhaps they can be influenced by the kids and they will transmit wherever they know so that risk gets better communicated along those age groups not so keen on tech. That's one of the things that I believe we can work on.
Thank you very much. So the audience has been very patient with us on the panel. So I would give the microphone to Emanuele.
Just one thing is, that I miss. When you talk about technology, I think it's not strictly necessary that it's digital. Okay, because also we addressed kids in the project, but we design a desk game. Okay, to train more or less 400 kids in Florence from 7 to 11 years old. And we didn't use tablet, smartphone, something like that, but a game table game. The name is Goose in the Riskland. So we use something that they can know. And through the game, in 2 hours, organizing groups, because also it's important to avoid competitions. Okay, because also competitions is something that is not very nice at that level, at that years old. So groups, and together they can help themselves within the group to arrive at the end, learning something with fun and something like that. So the game is coded, there is also designed and something like that. But when we talk about technology, we need to have a broad view.
Thank you. So here we go. 4 very good presentations with a lot of insights from different angles on the topic. And I would like to ask the audience, and here's already a hand coming up.
Paul Paes from Lisbon. I have 3 questions. First, for my compatriot. If you think it is possible or sustainable, economically sustainable, all the efforts we are doing in Portugal, the government and the private owners of the forests, in the future, if we don't change the things, change the way we look to the forest and to look to the interior of the country, you look to the economic value of the forest and the waste of the forest and so on. The second question is to Maggie and to Harold. The question is, it's important to lead with the children, but the question is how do children change with your project, change the plans? How to the plans are different because the children are engaged, or you just show to the children how to do this, in case of disaster, or the plan are different because the children are engaged in the project. And the third question is for Emmanuel. The question is, I think Florence, it's a touristic city. And you talk about the exercise. The exercise don't engage the tourists. And the tourists don't like to, they have 1 day, 2 days to visit the city, and they don't like to get in. But how to prevent a city when we have many, many tourists during the day, during the night? Thank you.
Shall we collect some more questions before our panelists answer, or? Yeah, over there.
Thank you for the very instructive presentations. I'm Peter Koppens from the European Investment Bank, and I have a question for Emanuele on the integrated approach that he says that the tool he developed is not just for disaster, but is also useful, for example, for garbage collection, public transport. To what extent in the municipality they manage to bring everyone around the table, and is the tool that you develop basically an occasion or an opportunity to streamline plenty of other processes?
Maybe a final question before here in the very front. Okay.
Good morning, Sébastien Lahaye from France. Thanks for your very interesting presentations. I like the presentation from explaining how you try to engage with this whole community, and on the other hand, we've had this wonderful presentation from Maggie about how to engage with children. I would say that there is still somebody lacking between, let's say, 20 and 80 years old. So my question is maybe more to the chairman, to Frank, and to the European community. How can we now influence local policymakers and managers, emergency service managers, and everybody to shift from emergency response to now engaging with population, because that's, I think everybody agree in this room that that's the key things to do now.
And then we have got a comment here from the very front.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you very much for your very inspiring speeches and video indeed. Yesterday we already mentioned the issues of citizen awareness, and it's a very, very crucial issue for ready to research how to tackle the citizen dimension. Yesterday we mentioned the links that we have established between policymakers already, practitioners, industry SMEs, scientists community regarding disaster risk management aspects. But the fifth element is as a citizen, and they are lacking from our networking discussions. So we have been repeatedly approached to say, okay, what can you do to ensure that research will indeed tackle this dimension? And I would like just to inform you, because it's a comment, that we have a call open for the work program 2018-20. So we have 3 years call being foreseen in the DRS1 topic of the Secure Society program at DG Home, tackling this. And we don't have the solution. We simply guess that we need to do something to involve citizens. How to involve citizens? Who are they? How to involve maybe cities better in research? How to ensure that, for example, if we have tools, alert system, prevention things, response technologies, and so on, we are getting them to demonstrate technologies that have been developed by research using cities' facilities. We don't know, but I would like just to tell you that this is open. What you have said are fully in line with what we would expect, so we have the first call open this year, there will be evaluation, is fully in line, and I would like to encourage you to participate in these dynamics. If you don't have time this year, maybe next year, it will be largely open, still discussed next this December at the community of users, and we have the Security Annual Research Conference, which will be open on the 5th and 6th of December. Citizen awareness will be one of the topics. Please help us. We need you. And I was very interested by these vulnerable communities, child, and as you said, João, elderly people as well, how to ensure that they are indeed brought into this picture, connected to our complex environment, discussion and so on. And this is really eminently human. And thank you, Maggie, for your wonderful videos that you have shown, because this shows the human dimension. Thank you.
Wonderful. So let's go maybe from João, then Maggie, then I, Harald, and Emanuele, and we can answer the questions.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, to answer the first question, our landscape is currently unsustainable, clearly unsustainable. So in 10, 15 years, you will not have the need to communicate risk or manage risk, because risk will not exist. People will not be there. The landscape will not support the presence of people if they want to be alive, that is. So we have a need to create a value chain from the beginning to the end. We have to restore economics and make the land a place where you can live and have your opportunities. And that will take, of course, 40 years or so. And you know from what you hear back home that the pressure is up to solve everything in weeks or in a couple of months, and that's impossible. It will take several years to solve, but it's currently unsustainable. And I guess you know that, because the question was in itself a little bit of a provocation, which I welcome, because it's very nice. Somebody mentioned that we are lacking people from the 20 to 80 years, a large group of people. I believe we have to work with that group of people through economics. Things have to be attractive for people to stay where they are or to go to new places and have a fulfilling life. So that's one of the things that I believe we have to do. We have to make people in their 80s not doing what they are doing now. We have to target kids so that they can speak with adults and infuse them with better practices. And we have to tackle people from the 20 to the 80s so that they can have a viable economic life wherever they are, so that they make informed decisions that protect them from risks. And to end with the comment I received from that side of the room, I guess people are usually not involved in these discussions because most likely nobody ever asks them, what do you need? They're not asked this very simple question. So we have to go to people and ask, what do you need? How do you live from the land? And from those questions, you can give them solutions. And that will help us manage risk, communicate risk, because we will know exactly what we are working for. Because their needs will be the center of our solutions. That's one of the things we definitely have to do. Thank you.
Me? So thank you. That question is very, very important, isn't it? Are the plans going to change, or is it just that children are more aware of risk? So it's both, I think. So, for example, in the film you saw the children asking for emergency plans to be widened to cover anxiety and fear. So we have pledges that we've collected from relevant people, and we have their names and addresses, and they have pledged to expand their plans in those ways. So we will be following those as far as we can. So the idea is that emergency plans will change in a way that benefits everyone, not just children. But then there are particular changes that we've also observed happening based on the framework that we've produced. So, for instance, a disaster psychologist from Madrid took an interest in our project and now is writing into the training for disaster psychologists. That's a facility we don't have in the UK. I've never heard of a disaster psychologist, but in Spain they have them, apparently. In the training module, she is writing some of our recommendations into that training. So there's very particular impacts of the project, but also this broader attempt to change emergency plans per se. And then also, some places had no plans at all. Some schools that we worked in had no evacuation plan or no emergency plan or no flood plan or whatever the local risk was, and now they're developing them. And if they developed them, they already had them. Nobody knew where they weren't reviewed regularly. So it's on different levels that we're hoping for those changes. And someone said there's a gap, the 20 to 80-year-olds are missing. They are. I used to work with older people, not children, and I actually would quite like to challenge this myth that older people don't engage with technology, because if you think about the life of an 80-year-old, they have witnessed more technological change in their lifetime than a younger person has. A very fast, very radical technological change. So it's about, I think, engaging with what forms of technology they use and they're familiar with, and you know, how to engage with those. And then I agree very much with your final point. Nobody asks. So, you know, it's about knowledge exchange, I think, actually. There are local knowledges and local memories and cultural memories which can inform our planning, but also there are new ideas and observations that we need, and what you call solutions that we need to bring in. So,
and I've been asked a question about how to engage with regional authorities and how we can persuade regional authorities. Now, the big carrot the European Union has is the regional development funds, and they are managed, what we in the EU refer to as indirect management. So it is really the local authorities in their home constituencies that manage the money, and the Commission has kind of like a guardian function. Now this management does come with strings attached, so especially in the next financial framework there will be a whole discussion about the rule of law. So these funds will also be attached to questions like independence of the courts, of the juridical system, freedom of the press, and all these issues. But then also, of course, environmental issues, disaster risk reduction issues are generally a possibility to take into account when approving this management. So in Portugal, for true or false, there is a perception that also maybe sometimes in the past decades these funds have led to monocultures in the rural areas, which then were more prone to risks than should be. So there's a whole discussion about how to make these funds more, how to use them more for reducing disaster risk. And Laura, the first speaker of today, she knows much more than me about all that. I'll give to you.
Yeah, thank you. To Philip's question first. We just finished a project, EU project last year called ASSET. It was all about epidemics and pandemics, how to communicate with the public, because we have seen that people now stop vaccinating their kids, and there is a lot of misinformation out which people are influenced on in social media. So part of this project, we had something we called participatory governance, and this project consisted of in 8 European cities, we picked 50 people randomly, which was invited to answer different questions at the same time. So this was in Oslo, it was in Rome, it was in Ireland, in Dublin. I can't remember all cities. So about 400 people were engaged same day. And they were asked questions like, who do you trust when an epidemic or a pandemic is coming? And they had to answer, first of all, in this conference room, they were sitting by different tables. First, they got information on the issues by a movie or some information. Then the questions were raised at the tables, and they discussed among themselves, and then they answered the questionnaire. Simple questions on different issues, on pandemics and things. And out of this came a lot of statistics, which is available, and you find one thing is concluding at the last was, would you like to be engaged again in things like this? And the answer was yes, overwhelmingly. So this could be something to play further on. The Danish Institute of Technology was responsible for this, who has developed a pretty good methodology on how to do participatory governance. That's one thing I can recommend. The other thing, which also is related to this, because we are ourselves our first responders. Because if a disaster strikes, you cannot always expect to have a release by or relief by the first responders before after some time. So, as I told in my presentation, the Chinese are very focused on community emergency response teams. And that could be something, I don't know if it's included in the program, but that could be another thing. The third and last thing I will mention, it's about the kids. We had a conference in Japan. Part of this conference, we were visiting a training facility actually for kids, but we were also taking the tests. This was a huge area, and there was different stations where we had an electronic device we were given at the start, and we had to go to different stations in order to address fires, gas leaks, evacuation, and different issues. And we had to answer questions on this. And when we came to the end, it was seeing, would we have survived these disasters or not? We got a score. It was a quite interesting setup because, you know, the Japanese, they are very close to disasters, and education for kids is very fundamental in the education system in Japan. Something to look at as well. And for your roadshow, why don't you have a day that parents together, grandparents with kids, only open for them one day? So you also get the grandparents in hand with the kids. And to the last one question about plans. How do you get actually the plans for the kids? The school system has developed very much. So if risk comes into being part of the education system, actually the kids will make up very good plans themselves. And this is a very learning tool. I see my kid come back and they do a lot of professional presentations. So getting this into school, making up plans, and we can use it. Okay, sorry.
Yes. Very quickly. Yeah. Okay, how to manage 12 million of tourists required 2 hours of discussion. So I would know this. This is a big issue. I think I have not the right answer, but my idea could be to work at different levels in some way. The tourists that arrived could have for sure different culture, different risk perception, and sometimes happen that their foreign affairs ministry send to them some recommendation when they travel abroad. Okay, this happened for states citizen, also for Italian that wants to go around for the major risk of the city that is going to be visited. But once they arrive in the city, we can disseminate to them some simple leaflets that could be stay at the hotel. Or also we could ask to them to download an app that could be delayed as soon as they leave the city, in which there's a sort of a civic app. Civic app means it's a sort of a channel, direct channel between the tourist and the authority, and through them they can receive any kind of alarm or alert, let's say from the civil protection alert for climate issues or something like that. Because these information are available, but no one knows, in particular for the tourists, how to obtain this information. Also, most of them are in Italian, so it's very difficult. So we need to think about in multicultural, multi-language way to make this information available, but to inform as soon as the citizen, the tourists arrive in the city, at the hotel, at the bus parking, in every contact point, to download or to inform them about that something happens. For sure, from the city perspective, we should think about in terms of resilience instead of risk, because risk is something that you know, and you can prepare for that. The resilience is something that don't know. You don't know. It's so-called unknown unknowns. So we need to be prepared for something that could happen, but you don't know the magnitude, the kind, how many people will be affected. So from the city side, we need to continuously allocate or made available resources to be prepared for any kind of things. For sure, we cannot involve tourists in the 2 days visit in the civil protection exercise. This is definitely. Yep. No, the last one. The last one for the European Investment Bank. Come on, the cities, the city council and the department of the city council was involved in the project since the beginning, thanks to the project, because they are partner of the project, and you know the project forced in some extent the partner to act on some kind. The difference is this time is that the departments that usually don't talk each other, information technologies, mobility department, technical service, they are start to talk each other because they have data. Since we work with data, each office has data, and they should open this information to us. So in this way, everybody became to be aware about the inherent knowledge that exists in the municipality, and this knowledge start to be exploited by us and by themselves because the information go back to them. Just to give you very, very last thing, an example, the snow plan for risk snow in Florence, we have up to, before the project, 3-4 different snow management plan, one from the public transport, one for the mobility department, one for civil protection, one for so all of them were different. Thanks to the project, thanks to they forced to be stay in the same table, this plan is going to be unique.
Thank you very much. As a final word, I would like to share the 2 key learnings that I take away from this session today. And the one for me as a communicator, very, very interesting and important is what I heard from different sides is that people tend to overestimate their capacities to deal with risks. I think for a communicator, this is something that I will have to think about what to do about this. And the other key learning that I take away for our community is I see here this empty table at the front, and there are clearly some people missing, and I have got the impression this is the insurance industry. So with this learnings that I take away, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you all very, very much. Thank our excellent panelists. Thanks to the audience, and have a good lunch break.